and welcome to this second video in a two-part series on the creation of a healthy self, or in this second video, the creation of unhealthy selves or wounded selves. So in the first video, you will have learned that in an ideal world, we'll all end up being healthy, resourced, well-adjusted, high emotional intelligence people, right? This I that is just fully ready to engage in the world in a good way all the time. Now, clearly that's not what happens, right? We're raised by real people who are raised by real people who, back into time. And parenting has always been hard. Parenting has always been complicated. I've got 4 kids. Each one of them requires a different parenting style, and that has been a whole lot of fun to learn. And one of the reasons to learn it is with the hopes of creating healthy, well-adjusted children or adults when they finally get there. And so the idea here is that we're going to look at what happens when mistakes are made, when needs go unmet. And the idea here is just to begin to recognize why sometimes we behave like children. Why sometimes we're looking at somebody who's like, 45 and they're yelling and screaming and stomping their feet like they're 3 years old. How does that make sense? Have you ever caught yourself doing that? You're like looking back at something that just went sideways on you and you're thinking, wow, that was really immature. I wish I hadn't done that. And then you look at your life and you see that you've done that many times, right? So that's an unhealthy self or a strategic self. And we're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like and really what we can do with those little guys and help them grow up a bit. So the idea is to understand that in the previous video, you'll remember, we're all born with wisdom and power and goodness, and we want to thrive, right? We've got this drive in us. And at some point, some of that changes. And where is that? Well, we still, in this story, have needs, right? We have the needs that every human has, and the needs that are specific to how we were made, right? We all have our own unique expression of our genomes and all of that. So essentially, we have these needs. Now, in most homes, we will get a certain level of support, right? And if you are able to watch this video at all, it means you're alive and conscious, which means you have, at the very least, got fed, at the very least, were held and cared for, at the very least, were, just generally given the basic sustenance of life. However, we all want more than that growing up. And so what happens is that sometimes our needs actually go unmet. And there's nothing we can do about this as a kid, right? So if you're 2 years old and your mom is sick and she can't get up at night to comfort you, that's just reality sometimes, right? And maybe dad has a night shift and so you get to be sad and alone for a little while. And you have to figure out what to do with this. And so what happens is that we figure out kind of a way around. We figure out a way that we can meet our own needs or suppress our own needs, to think, well, that obviously doesn't matter, or boy, I really need to get that met, so I'm just going to go do it, right? And so what happens is we kind of figure out our own way to do things. And we use a little I as a representation of that. So we all want to be kind of these grown-up, big I people, right? But what happens is when we're growing up, we get all of these little I's, right? These fragmented selves that come about as a result of unmet needs, right? And they represent our attempt at getting those needs met. And so when we experience these things at 3, so let's say at 3 years old, your parents are having an argument in the living room, and you don't feel safe, and you don't feel comfortable, and you're a little scared about what's going on, your strategy might be to actually leave the room and go hide in your room. Go to your bedroom if you have one, right? Or go hide under the bed, or whatever it might be. And this is what a 3-year-old has access to, right? 3-year-old isn't going to be able to, reason with their parents and help them work things out. A 3-year-old isn't necessarily going to even know that it's not their fault, right? So a 3-year-old will just go off and do what it does. And if the strategy works at that age in the mind of that child, then that strategy becomes a habit. It becomes kind of the way that they deal with things. And so then obviously we run into more than one of these kinds of problems growing up. And we have different kinds of problems as we grow up, right? When we hit the preteen years, we have certain kinds of challenges. When we hit the teen years, we've got certain kinds of challenges. And so we develop strategies at those times which fit the resources we have at the time, right? And my kids are probably sick of me saying this, but your brain does not fully develop until you're 25. And during your mid-teens, 16, 17, 18, you are by most definitions functionally insane, right? You've got some significant gaps in your capacity to engage with the world in a consistent, structured, resourced way. And that's part of the challenge, because at that point, you're trying to pull away from your parents and establish your own identity and do all those sorts of things. And we'll use whatever strategies are available to us at that level of resource, right? So when we're 16, we might develop a strategy of how to deal with mom and dad, or to deal with bullies, or to deal with whatever, that, at 30, looking back, if you took the time to reflect, you would notice is not exactly the most resourced way to deal with that. And nobody really tells you, when you turn 20 or when you turn 25, that, oh, hey, guess what? You now get to reassess all your life strategies. You're now responsible for your whole life. And you can no longer blame your parents for your life, because you are now a fully resourced adult, or at least as resourced as is possible right now. And so you're left with all of these little eyes kind of running around. And if we don't take the time to grow them up, then they will continue to dominate our lives. And that is simply because that's the way things are. And all of these guys represent kind of a wound, or a series of wounds in your life. And if you think about it, like the first time you came home from kindergarten and you show your mom the picture that you drew, and you're really proud of this. You worked hard, you used all the crayons or whatever. You show mom and she looks at it and she doesn't even know what it is, right? She's like, oh, what a cute giraffe. No, mom, it's a horse, right? And, that little kind of wound of I'm not the artist I thought I was, my mom doesn't like my stuff, whatever, can land in different ways for different people. But for some people, they may say, oh my goodness, I have to get so much better at coloring. Right? So mom knows that I'm coloring a giraffe versus a horse, or the other way around, right? So a kindergarten kid might start thinking, okay, I have to get better at this. And you might get a little I that we know as the perfectionist. Right? I get my needs met, my needs for affection, for approval, for respect, and those sorts of things by being perfect. Right? We're going to get this sucker right the first time, and we're not going to show it to anybody until it's ready, right? So that kind of tendency, that drive to always try to produce at 100%, is actually a little I. It's an ungrown up strategy that may have worked when you were in high school, where teachers will give you an A if you do the perfect thing, right? But don't work in the real life, where, frankly, nobody's giving out grades anymore. Right? Nobody is communicating in those ways. And frankly, your life is so much more complicated when you're an adult that you don't have these kind of single things. So the strategy stops working, if it ever worked. Right? Yeah, but, perfectionists are out there. And maybe you identify with this particular little I. And I would encourage you to think about, at the end of this video, or discuss in group, what are your little I's? Right? We all have these little strategies. I've had a person talk about what they call their rage guy, Mr. Rage, Mr. Angry. Right? That's another kind of little I that can come out as a self-defense mechanism. You know, you throw a fit, you get really angry, people leave. Right? Whatever the situation was that was bothering you is now over, either because you've beat the situation to a pulp or the person, or everybody's left, or you've been arrested and now you have a whole other pile of problems. Right? So there's this kind of this rage guy, there's another one, the bully, right? We can kind of get our needs for control over life, our needs to feel good and strong and respected by bullying others, by finding and targeting those who are weaker or more vulnerable. And so then we kind of have that strength, right? But it's not a great strategy, right? When you want to have healthy relationships, if you want to be a healthy grown-up person, being a bully, clearly not cool. The opposite side of that is, you know, there can be the what's called the victim, right? The person who kind of stops taking responsibility for their life and for their own healing because it's somebody else's fault, right? It's somebody else's fault that this didn't happen. It's somebody else's fault that that didn't happen. Somebody else's fault that I'm broken. Somebody else's fault that I'm not in a place where I can get my needs met, right? I had terrible parents, or I had a terrible brother, or my cousin abused me, or whatever it might be. All legitimate problems that require healing and strategy and all of that, but just playing the victim and getting stuck in that idea and then dealing with all future problems like that, not a healthy thing. And we're going to talk about my personal favorite. I call him Houdini. And this is not part of any kind of readings that I've done. This is just kind of discovery for myself, is that whenever things got a little uncomfortable, emotionally primarily, for me in my home, I would just leave the room. I would go and sit in my office, or go find my comfy chair, go for a walk, whatever it might be. So this Houdini strategy worked well when I was growing up, because I lived on 90 acres and I could literally just leave and not see anybody if I didn't want to. We could just, you know, hike into the bush, go sit under a tree, read a book, go cross-country skiing, whatever. I could leave. And this was okay in my home because it meant things settled down and everybody calmed down, and there wasn't this emotional discomfort. So being emotionally discomforted in our home wasn't okay. And so Houdini served me well in that context, and not so much when I got married, right? Because now I've got a wife who wants to connect, wants to be with, and every time it got emotionally difficult, I Houdini, right? That's a problem. And so I needed to figure out, and still working on it to a certain extent, how to grow up this little fella. Now the interesting thing is that we have usually multiple little eyes, right? And the more broken our upbringing, the fewer things we are supported in, the more little eyes we'll have, and the more important they are to us. And these little eyes are characterized by certain sorts of behaviors. One of them, and this is one of the ways that you can figure out, hypervigilant, okay. Hypervigilant is one of the ways that we can know that we are being in a little I strategy, right? Because these little guys, they want to be in the world, right? They want to be out there. And so they're paying attention very, very carefully. There's a part of your brain tuned in to watch for the slightest hint, just the teensiest hint, that that strategy is going to be necessary in the next bit. And so it's watching for the scenarios in which that strategy is used. So for Houdini, I'm looking very, very carefully, internally and externally, for those signals that things are about to get emotionally messy. And I just need to have the slightest hint of it to start thinking, oh, okay, either I need to calm this whole thing down, or I need to be thinking about where I'm going to go and figuring out how to get out of the room, right? So that's my Houdini already, you know, just ready to go. So one of the ways that we like to think about all of this is about like driving a bus, right, with a bunch of kids. So our healthy I, who we kind of want to be, is driving the bus. And on this bus are all our little eyes. And what happens is this hypervigilance kind of gets the kid from the back of the bus to the front of the bus and asking to take the wheel, right? And when we let the little eye kind of run its course, what happens is we as the bus driver step back, give the bus the wheel to the little eye, and the little eye does what he does, right? And so one of the ideas that we find helpful in thinking about this is that as our resource selves, as our adult selves, we don't want to give our little eyes permission to drive the bus, right? We want to be in charge of the bus all the time. That does not mean that we don't listen to these little eyes. Because what they're telling us, and what their hypervigilance is about the service of self. They are trying to prevent wounding. They're trying to do what they think, what the strategy says, is going to be best for us. And the problem with that is the fact that these little eyes are myopic, right? They don't have anything in mind other than their specific scenario, what it is that they're reacting to, right? So I had a client who one of his little eyes was self-reliance. And we'll even call it fierce self-reliance, because this dude was seriously locked down, right? He did everything. And if he saw that one of his staff wasn't doing the thing the right way, he would just do it. Because if you want to get it done right, do it yourself. I'm sure you've heard that before. And that was his firm belief. And he seriously believed that really he was better at almost everything than everybody else, at least better than good enough at all of it. And so then he would go and do it. And what that meant was he was solving every problem that showed up around him all by himself, right? So this is a very myopic perspective, to think I'm the only one that has resources, awareness, ability, skills to deal with this, and I'm enough for this situation. And that's simply not true. The reality is we all need support. We all need help. If we're married, we have a spouse that can help us. If we've got more kids, sometimes our other kids can help us. Sometimes we've got family that can come in, or professionals that we can hire. And so this myopic kind of perspective that I can deal with this myself leads to all kinds of unpleasant outcomes. And in fact, this little guy kind of came hand in hand with a bit of rage, right? Because he was really angry that nobody else was competent in the world. And so this idea of fierce self-reliance is another little eye. It feels very adult, it feels very manly, right? We're doing it on our own, but if you think about it, where did this start? I mean, did he ever try to teach a 3-year-old how to tie their shoe? Right? Some of them are like, no, I can do this myself, right? I can dress myself, I can feed myself, and it's done usually well before they're actually able to, but they've decided that they're going to meet their needs, and they're going to do it. So this is a 3-year-old strategy, maybe even a 2-year-old strategy. This is a strategy of really quite young mind. And so this idea that we actually do need support and that it's okay and safe to reach out for it is this idea. But if I'm this eye driving a bus and I notice a problem is coming, if Mr. Fierce Self-Reliance comes up and says, hey dude, you're going to have to do this yourself, come on, let me drive, I got this, we need to be able to say to that fella, thanks for letting me know something's coming up that's going to need to be solved, and I now need to do something with that. Like, it's an important thing to notice. It's a genuine need that this little eye is responding to. So we're not saying these are bad. What we're saying is they're immature. What we're saying is they're not grown up yet. And now, as adults, we actually have a choice to grow them up. And so we're saying, don't kick them off the bus. In fact, keep the bus. Keep them in the bus. They're there to serve you, but the idea is to bring them alongside and grow them up and help them become mature. And eventually they will join with us and become part of our natural grown-up resource self. And because we'll have adapted the strategy of fierce self-reliance into an appropriate level of interdependence. Right? It's not about being fully independent, and it's not about being fully dependent. It's about this idea that we can be interdependent. We can, in fact, engage with each other in meeting our needs. And so we've got this bus full of little eyes, all of them hypervigilant and watching for their opportunity to shine. They're all myopic. They just have this very, very narrow view, which means, of course, that they're not really considering I consciousness, you consciousness, we consciousness. It's literally just a little I consciousness. It's just what they can see from there. And so there's very little strategic in terms of long term. They're more tactical. Let's do something now. And so we need to be careful about the fact that these guys are immature. And we need to find a way to kind of mature those strategies up so that they actually fit into our lives, so that they work for me, they work for you, and they work for us. And that is really the challenge of growing up our little eyes. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying, oh, now that you know this, it's just all a cakewalk, because that's not how that works. But what it is when we begin to be aware of these little guys, we begin to be able to manage how we interact with those strategies, those tactics, so that we can begin to grow them up, right? And begin to be kind to these poor little guys, right? They're there because they're wounded. They're there because they want to help, and they just don't know how, right? And so we need to figure out a way to kind of grow them up. The challenge with that is they're automatic. You probably don't even know most of your little eyes, and I'm still discovering mine as I kind of mature and grow and work through some of the bigger ones. Then I get to see the other ones, right? If one strategy doesn't get done, then maybe another strategy will start showing up. And so it's essentially, this is part of kind of the lifelong work of maturing and growing ourselves up and becoming the people that we want to become. So what we want to do is to continue to grow our own understanding of ourselves. So this I consciousness that we mentioned in the previous video is something that we'll actually talk about again in other videos. And we want to work our way towards doing this. And what are the questions we can ask? When a little I shows up, when we notice a little I, usually after the fact, when we're reflecting back on what happened, why did I behave in an immature way? Why did that go the way it's always gone before? And those sorts of questions, we can actually begin to realize that there's a different way of doing things. And so the first thing that we want to be able to do and begin to kind of pick up our own capacity to be mature is, how do we do self-care, right? In terms of our own needs. Okay? When these guys show up, it's because you're having a need that's not being met. And so we need to figure out how that very legitimate need gets met. Or we may be even suppressing our needs. That's a little bit what Houdini is about kind of stuffing my needs away and hiding them. So what happens if I start letting those come out, if I need to share what's going on for me? So I need to begin to ask myself, how can I get my needs met? How can I do self-care? And the second thing is then, how can I handle the situation, right? Because all of these things happen, they all come out during a particular situation, right? They don't just come out for fun, they come out because they see that they're needed. And so now you've got a situation where some sort of strategy or tactic is necessary. And so it's not enough just to think, oh, okay, I need to do self-care in this. There is also the fact that there is me, there's you, and there's us, right? So this is a situation that's happening. What do we need to do to resolve this situation? And then the third thing is how to do that respectfully and safely. So, I mean, there's lots of things we can do to resolve the situation. The bar that we would like you to kind of come over is the bar of respect and safety, right? So that you are able to do self-care and meet your own needs, handle what's ever happening in the situation, and do that in a way that shows respect and is safe for everybody that's involved. So now that we know this, we know where our unhelpful strategies come from, why we seem to have these patterns of behavior which are not helpful, and why we seem to keep using the same strategies that ultimately don't work. They represent our needs, and so we need to figure out, how can we get our needs met more effectively and in ways that feel good for ourselves and for those around us. So here's an opportunity to think about, what are my little eyes? And then maybe picking one of them and trying to grow it up a little bit. Notice which one we use the most and maybe try that one. And then look at what does it mean to take care of whatever need that strategy, that tactic, that little eye wants to meet. And then how can you handle the situation? And finally, how can you do that in a respectful and safe way? Thanks for watching the video.